Hi, I'm Lauren Hansel. I'm a costume technician in the Cal State East Bay costume shop. And I've worked on various displays in our main theater lobby. And many different things go into our lobby displays. Sometimes we use them to promote upcoming shows. Sometimes we use them to highlight shows that we've already produced that, like this one, Tongues, went to the Kennedy Center. The costume we chose for this display cabinet was one of the main characters in our dance theater piece, Tongues. And we chose this costume because it was one of the most beautiful in the production, and the character had a very integral role in the piece. But also it's an interesting costume to look at because the design concept for the show was done in different ways. It was a very collaborative process developing the entire show. And it was done more on the concept of sort of sepia tone photographs of ancestors, and not a specifically fully designed, drawn out costume plan. And we sort of put things together as the performances and the rehearsals came together, deciding that this character we wanted covered, and their face to be a little bit more enigmatic. This is another example of a costume from Tongues, and it's sort of another nice example of how we pulled together there's actually a lot of vintage clothing in here, and newer things that we altered to have a sort of specific aesthetic. And then when we get ready to display a costume, everything has to be cleaned, and we then have to do a bit of repair work. This costume received a bit of a beating. There was a lot of dancing in the piece, so we had to do a bit of repair work on things to sort of make it presentable again. And that's like a common activity in the costume shop, is keeping things sort of going over the run of a show. There's a lot of maintenance work that has to go into the costumes, especially when they're dancing. The clothing, it's another thing we have to keep in mind when we're picking older costumes, is will it be able to stand up to the movement that'll be required. And sometimes things completely fall apart. We had some older costumes that literally just fell apart. But these held up very nicely and traveled quite a bit. So it's another sort of element when we look at the costumes. There's sort of broken buttons and things that are nicely worn. And for this piece, it worked very well to have sort of worn in nice costumes. But it's another consideration that goes into designing, is whether you need something sparkling new or it can be a little aged, if that sort of fits with the aesthetic you're looking for. For display purposes, we have the costume on a mannequin. We use these mannequins for lots of different things in the costume shop. From sizing things, you can sort of throw costumes on a mannequin and see how they look, and sort of size things if you don't have an actor in. And then they work very nicely for displaying things as well. There's sort of different types. This one actually has full legs, and then there's other kinds that sort of have a skirt, or just sort of no legs. Most women's mannequins are kind of that style. But in men's mannequins, they quite often have legs. So you can have sort of a nice look at how pants looks. I have several years experience working in the costume shop as a construction assistant, building things. And then I'm an alumni of Cal State East Bay, and during that time I did a couple summer internships with it was then known as the San Francisco Performing Arts Library and Museum. It's now known as the Museum of Performance and Design. And I worked helping to maintain existing exhibits and assisted with mounting some new exhibits at the museum. So it was a really interesting learning process on sort of how to visually represent a performing art that's ephemeral. We used film for things, we used photographs, all sorts of different images. Costumes were always very integral because you can see, since it's something that's so personal to the performer, having a costume there, you can see the wear marks, you can see the sweat marks, you can see how big the person was. It's sort of a really good example, sort of the closest to having the performer there that you can get. So that's largely where my sort of display experience comes from.